Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 2401. I do thank my colleague, Mr. Bishop, for granting the time for the opposition. This bill is really another attempt by the Republican leadership to demonize the Environmental Protection Agency and dismantle any government regulation intended to protect our nation's public health and the environment. H.R. 2401 is a waste of time and an absolute insult to the millions of Americans without jobs. Instead of crafting legislation to increase consumer confidence, instead of helping Americans hold on to their homes, instead of creating jobs for the millions of people who are unemployed, instead of relieving the burden of the middle class by making the tax code more fair, my friends on the other side are asking us to vote on a bill that effectively bars the EPA from finalizing and implementing two of the most significant air quality regulations in decades. Coal plants, let me lay my bona fides out here, I do believe in clean coal. In the United States, they pump out 48 tons of emissions every year. Mercury contaminates more than 6 million acres of freshwater lakes. And I want to just take the prerogative of talking about one. I was born in Altamont Springs, Florida, and the nearest lake to where I was born was called Mobile, or is called Mobile. At one point, my grandfather could pass by and say to my grandmother, "I'm going down to the lake and catch some fish," and be guaranteed that that was going to be the case and bring it back home in short time. Now that lake is dead, and it's because of mercury contamination that that lake is dead. 46,000 miles of streams, and the stream that led into Lake Mobile is dead. And 225,000 acres of wetlands across the United States, and all 50 states have some type of fish consumption advisory. Let me repeat that. All 50 states have some type of fish consumption advisory. What's more, there are substantial economic benefits to these clean air rules that my friends are trying to block. The EPA estimates that the mercury and air toxic standards alone could generate more than 30,000 construction jobs and 9,000 long-term utility jobs benefiting steel makers, pipe fitters, boiler makers, and others. The economic value of air quality improvements totals $59 billion to $140 billion annually. That's 25,300 lives lost to toxic air pollution, over 11,000 heart attacks, more than 12,000 asthma attacks, and a significant portion of them being children, over 12,200 additional visits to the emergency rooms of our country, and hundreds of thousands of missed work days. Overall, the EPA predicts that the monetary value of protecting Americans' health through implementing the Clean Air Act is projected to reach $2 trillion in 2020 alone. Yet this bill ignores those benefits. Madam Speaker, all of us know that times are tough, but this great nation has been through tough economic times before. Environmental regulations are not the problem. The economy was really tough, and we are reminded of it often by my colleagues under President Carter. Yet the EPA at that time managed to set new national air pollution standards for airborne lead and began the phase out of ozone layer destroying gases from aerosol spray products. Nor has protecting the environment always been a partisan issue. The EPA has also had great success as under Republican presidents. Upon founding the EPA in 1970, President Richard Nixon said the following: "We can no longer afford to consider air and water common property, free to be abused by anyone without regard to the consequences. Instead, we should begin now to treat them as scarce resources, which we are no more free to contaminate than we are free to throw garbage into our neighbor's yard." That was in 1970. One of the first tasks assigned to the EPA was to enforce the Clean Air Act, also signed by President Nixon. Since its adoption, these regulations have prevented an estimated 200,000 premature deaths. During President Reagan's administration, the EPA tested elementary and secondary schools for asbestos for the first time and named protecting endangered wetlands a top priority, while subsequently opening the new Office of Wetlands Protection. And contrary to what many of my friends across the aisle believe, history did not end with President Reagan. President George H.W. Bush implemented the new cap-and-trade policies that successfully addressed the growing problem of the STAR program, helping Americans save money through adopting energy-efficient products and practices. Since then, Energy Star has saved Americans $17 billion on utility bills. And on a more personal level, I grew up at times with asthma, as did a cousin of mine who still suffers the effects of it. Several of the employees that work with me now and some before have had asthma, and I genuinely believe that if we did not have the clean air standards that we have today, some of us may not be here. In light of all these accomplishments, it's clear that H.R. 2041 is nothing more than an effort at the behest of a big set of businesses to delay and block necessary and important regulations that will keep our country safe and clean. Republicans claim that this bill assists agencies with their economic analysis of EPA regulations. This is nothing more than a convenient ad hoc justification. Firstly, all major regulations already receive years of extensive cost-benefit analysis before implementation. At the same time, this bill fails to take into account any of the health and environmental benefits of the regulations in question, rendering the one-sided cost-only analysis set forth by this bill unnecessary. Second, the version of the Energy and Commerce that was reported out suspends two major regulations that have been the subject of analysis, litigation, re-examination, and rewriting for over 2 decades. Both the National Environmental Policy Act and the Executive Order 12,866, signed by President Clinton, require federal agencies to perform the type of analysis required in the bill, including a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis. By requiring unnecessary and duplicative studies, my friends on the other side could not make their desire to indefinitely block these regulations any more clear. I've introduced an amendment that carves out an exception for rules and regulations drafted in adherence to the rules already on the books, freeing these important regulations to proceed along as scheduled. Madam Speaker, based on what I've seen by this Republican-led Congress, it's clear to me that they obviously have no intention of using their real power to create jobs. Instead, they prefer to waste time on measures such as this bill that are designed to do one simple thing, and that is to further delay both past and future regulations. Now, let me make it clear. I've quarreled, as have some of my colleagues with the Environmental Protection Agency, as rightly we should, when the circumstances permit. And that is, in my case, with the numeric nutrient standards that are proposed in Florida. A court has made a decision regarding the enforcement of those nutrient standards, and I believe that the communities involved are prepared to undertake to do what's necessary. And I do not believe that EPA has to involve itself at this point in time. But when I quarrel with EPA, as I do, I don't do it in a way that demonizes the agency. I do it in a way that's looking for a solution. One thing that I've learned in the years that I've been in this institution is that whether you have a right or left or center ideological perspective, to begin demonizing certain people suggests to me that those people probably have been successful. I don't know Lisa Jackson, the Environmental Protection Agency cabinet official, but I do know that the way people are screaming about the work that she has done suggests that she must be having some success. It's time to call my friends more interested in helping big business and the wealthy than the middle class and working poor Americans who continue to struggle all across this nation every single day. If we start cutting the regulations that protect the environment when we are down, where will we be when we recover? I've seen firsthand what happens in places that disregard environmental protections for the sake of business. I remember being in Xi'an, China, with a departed colleague, Gerald Solomon, who was chair of the Rules Committee, and holding my hand in front of my face and not being able to see it. Also had that same experience in Los Angeles, California, in the late 1950s. This certainly is not the kind of home that we want to leave for our grandchildren. The air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the soil on which we produce our crops is the earth that we call home. And in my view, we must keep it clean. Let me tell you what Ronald Reagan said. If we've learned any lessons during the past few decades, perhaps the most important is that preservation of our environment is not a partisan challenge. It's common sense. Our physical health, our social happiness, and our economic well-being will be sustained only by all of us working in partnership as thoughtful, effective stewards of our natural resources. President Reagan made those remarks on signing an annual report of the Council on Environmental Quality. Additionally, he said in a radio address that I'm proud of having been one of the first to recognize that states and the federal government have a duty to protect our natural resources from the damaging effects of pollution that can accompany industrial development. And more importantly, what he said is, what is a conservative after all but one who conserves, one who is committed to protecting and holding close the things by which we live. And we want to protect and conserve the land on which we live, our countryside, our rivers and mountains, our plains and meadows and forests. This is our patrimony. This is what we leave to our children. And our great moral responsibility is to leave it to them either as we found it or better than we found it. He made those remarks at the dedication of the National Geographic Society new headquarters building in 1984. President George W. Bush said, our country, the United States, is the world's largest emitter of man-made greenhouse gases. We account for almost 20% of the world's man-made greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, in a joint address to Congress, he said, I also call on Congress to work with my administration to achieve the significant emission reductions made possible by implementing the clean energy technologies proposed in our energy plan. Our working group study has made it clear that we need to do a lot more. Those words from two presidents that are revered rightly by many of us in this institution, and certainly by my colleagues that are Republican that share the same ideological perspectives, should be sufficient to put the rest of this polluting bill that we could rename the Toxic Polluting America measure. I reserve the balance of my time.